The Taming of Nan by Ethel Carnie. Chapter 1. The Sweeping Out. The voice of Nan Cherry, shrill and aggressive, sounded its war alarm on the quiet, dawn-glimmering street, whereupon a crowd of sparrows, busy picking up from behind that door of the unluckiest of unlucky numbers what looked like a supper flung out the night before, flew away with great commotion. Their panicky flight made a cloud of wings against a long white cloud, behind which boiled the gold of a September morn, ready to overflow the world of narrow fields. The town lay in a hollow below the little street. In the imperfect light it appeared as the body of a long dragon, from whose back rose 100 chimney stacks. These stacks pricked into the opaline glimmer of the sky like the charred fingers of some underworld giant, thrust smoking through the earth to grab at sun, moon, and stars. The bent figure of an old man who could toil no more crept from little door to little door, rousing others to toil, then disappeared from the street. Through it all the voice went on. A child's rebellious cry rose sharply, as it was roused to be carried out to nurse, quavering away into little exhausted murmurs of acquiescence, whilst the sound of a poker, rattling the bars of a fire that did not realize it must boil a kettle within 10 minutes, the banging of a door, the barking of a dog, were the first signs of industrial Lancashire waking up. Unawed by the echoes that shrilled back her voice in the mocking way of echoes, the shrew carried on her tongue onslaught. To all its fire, no defence answered. According to Scripture, a soft answer turns away wrath. But the man who wrote the proverb had not met Nan Cherry. Possibly, as Granny Harker said, Nan was familiar with that provincialism which states that nothing said often means quite a lot. Be that as it may, the fact has to be recorded that her rage leaped the higher for not being fanned by bad words. Her voice became such as only a man deaf and dumb, dead drunk, or a philosopher could hear without a human desire to choke it into human decency. "Thee as calls thyself husband, thou lazy son of a wilk, thy tay's brewed, mun a sup it for thee, the world's aired, and thee, how Polly, if I come up to thee, bitch, I'll scalp thee. Folk doesn't know what I go through. I don't shout my troubles off housetops, for you never get pity if you carry colour in your face." Then silence fell once more. The sparrows returned to their feast. The sound of a woman beating carpets 2 streets away woke dolorous echoes. Within the cherry castle, a chair was rocking. The sound suggested gritted teeth. A mighty yawn from an upper room was followed by a shower of ceiling plaster in the room below, as a number 11 foot touched the bedroom floor. The shower fell on the head of a dark-haired, comely-featured, blue-aproned woman rocking in the inglenook. Her body had a crouching attitude. Daylight, streaming through a red blind just behind her, spattered crimson bars and blotches over her. Nature had given her a pleasant exterior. Her chin might thrust itself out too prominently, but she did not look anything that could demoralize 99 men out of the 100. Only, as she turned her face to the fire, under that pattering shower of plaster, an expression crossed her face which stamped it. She was the untamable hooligan, the Stone Age hidden under the veneer of civilization. She had neither humour, imagination, nor protectiveness. She should have been an Apache's mate. She had married a porter, who gave her £1 a week and bought his own clothes. With that look upon her, it seemed miraculous that this cramped, drab kitchen could hold her. A jocular whistling of Home Sweet Home filtered down into the place that was mainly wash boiler, table and chairs, 4 badly blistered, dumb-painted walls, and a phonograph. On the very first sound of the big voice, there was a response of doggy delight from the yard, which, taken in conjunction with unframed pictures from our dogs and a couple of framed pedigree forms hung over a pipe rack holding pipes mostly crippled, told its own story of man's ancient love for dogs. Then more plaster fell. The loop cast upwards at the ceiling, just at the centre of its trembling, was rapier-like enough to have made a hole if a loop could. The boss of the show was itching up his braces. Innumerable bumpings on the same spot, at the same tick of the clock, week in, week out, had first shaken the ceiling. Bump. It really seemed as if the roof must give way at this last assault. He was crossing the room. His weight was set upon the stairs. They creaked under his 14 stone. 2 steps were followed by a longer pause, as the man dodged an angle of a dark staircase built for lesser men. On an afterthought, he called to the sleeper in the other room. "Polly?" The word was at once a caress and an apology. "I'm up." Muffled as it was by bedclothes, the voice had all the Harker euphony, that curious bird-like sound, come down from generations that had sung in choirs, and sometimes in pubs. "Lying little hellcat." The viciousness from the one member of the Harker stock who had been given no singing voice was of the quality which only one female can mete out to another. "I thought I was up." A girlish giggle ended the admission. It was a gush of light in a dark place, that trickle of laughter from a little white feather heart that might blow anywhere. It became a symbol of the tenacity of youth to turn to the sun of life to have its day in the mire of the pit or on a cinder heap of hell. "There's only one chance to get up," said the big voice of the man on the stairs, and he bumped down another step. The reply was curious, the voice more bird-like on account of bedclothes no longer muting it. "Oh, some gets up twice," was the remark on which her father pondered as he went down the stairs. Had the tone not been so utterly frivolous, the words might have been interpreted into some dark hint of discontent. Bump, bump. There were 13 bumps in all. Their steady way of coming on gave no clue that Cherry wished to dodge the storm waiting for him. He must pay this morning for that 10 minutes game at draughts he played last night with Billy Breeze, after which he had returned to find his shirt on the doorstep, his supper laid out on the pavement. The big porter, as he was known to Lancashire and Yorkshire passengers, bent a massive head and passed into the drab cage of a kitchen. He was almost a giant of a man, fair-haired, dangling in his left hand a pair of boots, ridiculously large in this world of dwindling manhood. A stump end of a cigarette was stuck in his close-shaven mouth, a cigarette being economized to the last shred thereof. It was a mouth that did not need covering up. Under it was a great depth of chin. His blue eyes were of the sleepy order that Granny Harker had once defined as being able to see without looking. His first action was to spit out the cigarette a couple of seconds before it would burn his mouth. His second was to blow out the smoky lamp, with a saving instinct to burn daylight. The glance he had cast at the woman in the chair was one of affectionate tolerance, mingled with that of a man who has lost all illusions, but knows that he has his feet if the worst comes to the worst. The woman returned the look with one only explainable by the fact that this was the man who had married her, who for 20 years, by the aid of laughter and defeat, was still unvanquished, yet outside what he sarcastically termed Thempet Club. With the persistency that is the virtue of the savage, she still maintained her attacks, whilst with the patient geniality of a Yorkshireman, he as stubbornly resisted. "Top of the morning," was his greeting. His attempt at the brogue would have turned an Irishman sick. "Jesus wept," was the response of the woman in the chair. It would be impossible to say how this shortest verse in the Bible became in Nan's mouth a challenge, anathema, and war-cry. The tone of the delivery was utterly divorced from the subject matter. It had passed into a new language. The big man sat down and laced his boots, thrusting the holes in his socks respectably out of sight, his bending position showing a neck like a gladiator's, and the great back of him that carried more boxes than any other man's on the Lancashire and Yorkshire Railway. There was a magnanimity about him only to be compared with that shown by a big dog attacked by a little one. He went off into the scullery, where his rendering of Queen of the Earth sounded through a great and cheerful splashing, combined with a blowing against the water, whilst from a kennel in the yard came a pandemonium of undisciplined dog emotions, which broke off the song into short ejaculations of, "Good little dog, Rag, going to show 'em what thou art, Rag, eh? Top of the morning, Rag," whilst the scratching at the kennel door, the barking delirium of worship, grew more frenzied. When it could no longer be withstood, Cherry went out, opened the kennel door, and out blundered the pedigree dog, one ear cocked at its top notch of joy, its body rolling along, its great feet making the slipper-like sound as it trotted before him, utterly unconscious that it was not the finest dog in the world. Perfect in colour, a good head on it, its overlarge ears that could perform weird gymnastics, its legs defined by a small boy, as bow-legged in front, knock-a-kneed behind, and walks like Charlie Chaplin, for some mysterious reason. Rag had got rickets and fallen short of his glorious ancestry. That it was a dog of spirit no man could have denied. There was no cringing sense of its own long shortcomings. Cherry sang out in full voice as he watched Rag trot before him. His face was softly paternal. It had upon it the faith in its regeneration which made him the unconscious laughing-stock of the whole street on his Sunday morning parades, to straighten Rag's legs. "That dog'll come into its own yet," he observed to the shrew, whilst he rolled shirt-sleeves over muscles that might have been used as art photographs. Nan's loot was aimed at shattering his morale. Cherry met without blinking the super-contempt that would have submerged the insensibility of a brass monkey. More than that, as it maintained its steady shrewish attack, he winked with the query as to whether he was not a good-looking man when he was scraped. Ominous silence greeted these overtures of friendship. Chirping to the pup, he wound up the blind. The sordid untidiness of the kitchen lay bare under the eye of day. Cherry looked out on another row of houses, and behind them the stone yard with its stone piles that almost blocked out the sky. "Everything in garden's lovely," he remarked, genially sarcastic after his survey. Nan's language in reply to this was fitted for the Apache's mate. The big man, hands in pocket, turned round from the window. Without appearing to do so, he was staring across at a railway almanac on the wall opposite. At various intervals on the date margin were little black crosses. These were the marks he had set to mark the epochs of their domestic cyclones. There was quite a big gap between the last cross and the present date. Therefore, his shoulders squared themselves. He hurried to get down, bite and sup before the burst. "That greedy devil! That's 10 the biggest cake!" shouted the woman in the chair, as he took one of 3 pieces from a plate with a snip in it, set on a table that appeared none too friendly to soap and brush. Cherry made no answer to this misstatement. He sat down, eating quietly. The pup settled down also, looking expectantly for crumbs. Arguments, the porter had long since discovered, were of no avail. Best to keep quiet, whilst the tide came on and up, and then to breast it at its flood. As he licked his fingers clean of the cake, the massiveness, the placidity of this half-literate British workman lent to him a paradoxical, fleeting resemblance to the gods in statue galleries. The shrill clapper of the woman's tongue raged against him. A chant-like rhythm sounded in her voice. Her breast heaved. She spat out vicious, corrosive words interspersed with oaths selected specially to attack his Yorkshire pride in coming of respectable folk. £1 a week to be a slave for a bloody Yorkshire tyke, With this exclamation she rose from her chair. The sound of Polly Cherry overturning a chair in her hurry to get dressed and out of the house before the storm came on was heard from above, a protesting, youthful nervousness in the incident. Cherry was watching his mate closely now. Out of one of these lulls would come the attack. But she went on again, hurling mud on his family, his living mother, his dead father, the respectability of the whole lot of them. The hooligan flood rising, shouting, shrieking, roaring, bursting down the barriers, until a hoarse raven note sounded in her voice. Her face showed whitely instead of its high colour. The kitchen dwindled and became a cage she was flinging herself against. This Amazon nursed in her breast the unquenchable desire to get him down. Yet, even as his eyelid flicked expectantly, she rushed at the table, seized something, hurled it. He ducked his head with the easy skill of long use. A swift glance revealed that the thing sent was the milk jug with Disraeli painted on it. A long china splinter had impinged itself in the nose of the prophet Moses, still, however, surveying the promised land through a baptism of milk very steadily. Grandma Cherry's wedding present had witnessed many of these scenes. "Bad shot, Nan," was his comment. Another woman would have collapsed and wept at his cheery ignoring of her attempt to quarrel with him. Nan usually began where other women left off. "Oh, at it again," came from the doorway. A big fair girl, whose colouring lent her a likeness to the porter, which her vivacity of expression tended to destroy, was looking in on them. Her parents were too engrossed to hear the disrespect in her tone. She regarded them both out of eyes yet sleep-heavy, a look of youthful antagonism mingled with something despairing. Then, with a certain callousness of demeanour, a movement of detachment from the house altogether, she edged away from them and took up her pot of tea. Being too hot to drink, she blew it, with an overfull, indeterminate little mouth that seemed hard to close. The dog came tugging at her blue mill apron. After picking Rag up, her face wore another look. She was divided between shielding the dog and the task of sipping her tea. Indeed, her face had as many swift expressions as a piano has keys. She was too childish or too careless to try and disguise them as yet. "I don't want to bother with thee," said the Yorkshireman in genial tones. "So cheesy." He might as well have tried to stem the sea. Apparently this was his usual preliminary to keep a clean conscience. "Polly," he said suddenly without turning his head, "lap my best clothes up, everything, my tie with blue spots." A glance at his mate's face told him that he had put his finger on the motive for this row before breakfast. She had hoped he would forget his clothes in the chaos. She wanted to pawn them and have a holiday down in Tanner Fold with the hooligan folk of Fiddle Row. Polly went off, dog in arms, her back expressive of flapper patience taxed to its utmost. Cherry did not notice it. He was watching. Even as Polly gained the threshold of the parlour, Nan rushed upon him. He reeled, despite his size. Her head only reached his top buttonhole, but her strength was a wildcat's. "Cheese it, Nan," he said calmly. One great hand loosed her from him, put her gently away in masculine reverence for woman. His tone had the jesting ease of a man who knows he is top dog. As if this magnanimity of his enraged her beyond endurance, the shrew came on again, and again with a show of fierceness that half covered the determination not to hurt her, he threw her off. "Hit me, Bill, hit me," she screamed at him. "For God in heaven's sake, hit me. I can fight. I'm not a toffee doll. Hit me, and let me hit back. Beat me if I can, beat me. Oh, hit me, like I were a pal. Hit me, Jesus wept, hit me." The motive of her attacking him was now forgotten. The rage in her sprung now from a deeper source, the source of all human drama, character. The rising flood was bearing her away. She was conscious of nothing but the desire to goad this cold-blooded, commonplace Yorkshireman near to murdering her, to break up the alien, quiet reserve that divided him from her. She wanted to wake devils in him, to make him like the mate she should have had. Protected by the tolerant chivalry in his blue eye, she attacked his manhood, driven on by the irresistible desire to draw some big danger into this monotonous, skimpy life. "Cheese it," he warned her again. Her nails had come perilously near his eyes. "Hit me," she almost sobbed. "Look here," he asked mildly, seizing her wrists. "What's it all about?" Then he added, while she struggled, "When are we going to live like other folk?" A faint note of exasperation sounded in his voice on the last words. "Before breakfast? To start on a man before breakfast?" He flung her away a little more roughly, yet with the same iron control. But for the whiteness of her face, its vicious menace, and a certain weariness on the face of the big porter, an onlooker could have taken it for a friendly Malc between husband and wife who were yet something of children. "Like other folk," echoed the shrew. "Jesus wept, do I care for other folk?" Standing there as she spoke these words, they became not so much individual antagonists as two opposite clans. A blaze of intense passion on the woman's face gave it a momentary beauty, a bigness not seen in her before. She rushed at him again. "Hit me," she persisted. "Forget I'm a bloody woman. Fight!" It was the cry of an Amazon pinned down in a narrow world she was not made for. Whilst the man's frown was growing as he threw her from him again, he was regarding her much as a tamer keeps his eye on a savage thing that may tear him. The thought that she had started on a man before breakfast became more intolerable. "Ooh!" exclaimed Polly. Parcel in hand, she had reached the threshold just in time to see Nan apparently bury her teeth in the man's arm. He jerked his arm. A long tatter was suspended from his elbow. "Another job for the lad to do," he said calmly. His incorrigible common sense drove the woman frantic. She came on again. As she did so, she met the full glance of his eye. With a swift movement he locked his hand round her jaw. She had seen him handle rags so when he didn't want it to bite him, as he looked at the progress of its feet. Her eyes expressed the indignity she felt. "One of these days one of us will get hurt," he warned her placidly. "It's a long run has no turning, they say." The shrew could make no answer. He was letting her feel how easily he could hold her so, what an atom she was, how little he feared for the worst she could do. A giant with a giant's strength, pitiful for her futile attempts to oust him from his rightful position in the household. Then he let her go. Her hooligan laughter filled the house. There was the sound of a pair of clogs pausing outside the little door. At that sound the face of the man changed. Half his placidity fled pell-mell. A light was kindled in his eyes. "Shut thy mouth, afore I shut it for thee," he breathed. The vulnerable spot had been touched, his hatred of them opening their mouths to fill everybody's. Myriads of well-conducted ancestors clamoured against her loud laughter, her shout to the whole world, and he turned his head involuntarily, listening disgustedly to the sound of a second pair of clogs stopping outside his castle walls. As he half turned back, swiftly, some instinct warning him, her teeth caught his hand. He made no sound, but gave his first blow, a smart, light cuff that toppled her hair down and did little more. "Shut that?" he asked of Polly, nodding towards the inner door. The girl shut it. A look of dark dissatisfaction had deepened. "Shut up," the porter commanded his wife. There was a white restraint on his face. "Let 'em listen. Penny a week to bury the sows. Christian cats, let 'em listen," shrilled the shrew. "At it again," came ironically from the street. "By mass, if she were mine." What she was going to say in answer to that other male, Cherry could only guess. Before it could be said, he had taken her by the throat. He had cast off his robe of restraint now, save for a few patches. The big fair girl, standing with her back against the door, the dog held in her arms again, had a helpless, forlorn look. "When are we going to live like other folk?" he asked her shrew. "Never!" The little indomitable word came chokily. The Yorkshireman tossed her away from him in disgust. "What does to live with me for, then?" she asked, in a loud, hysterical voice. It was the query the street had asked itself 1,000 times since their coming there. Cherry ignored it utterly, as outside the question. As he saw her coming on again, heard her burst of laughter that was purposely to draw a crowd round their door, a resolve leapt into his face. His eyes became terrible in their quiet smiling. He allowed her to get quite close to him, then his great arms shot out. He handled her as if she'd been a dumbbell. Up and up she went into the mid-air, to Polly's shriek of terror, whereupon there was quite a patter of clogs, running. "Drop that din," commanded Polly's father to the shrieking girl. He had become a resolute giant with great knitted brows. "Murder! Help! He's killing me!" screamed Nan. She almost touched the ceiling. The floor had become a dizzy thing far below her. She could hear the creaking of the mighty muscles. Whilst looking down she saw his upturned face, white in its effort not to dash her to the ground. This thing that had been a thorn in his flesh for 20 years. "Help! Murder!" Her appeal rang out again. Someone shook the door gently. Panic was in her cry now, but away down under the panic hooligan malice, proud triumph that she had got a crowd round, scorn of it and of him who cared for it, consciousness that every one of her cries was a stab at his Yorkshireman's pride. He merely raised her several inches. Her hair brushed a dangling cobweb on the ceiling. Beneath her she could feel the great strength of him, the stone-aged man she had evoked from the genial, prudent, rational being whose meals she prepared. He did not look unlike an Apache now. Whilst, as he looked back at her, she saw his look of scorn, that this was the only force she recognized. Brute force. "Bill," she ejaculated, "set me down." His great forehead was still knit in that magnificent frown of disdain. He did not answer that appeal. "Dad," said Polly. He did not hear her. "And to think," he murmured, that puzzled frown upon him, that searching for reasons why better women nor thee are murdered every week. In a sudden reaction from his rage he set her down on her feet, still giddy, blanched to the lips, apparently tamed. A half sigh of relief escaped him. He imagined that it was going to blow over without him having to give her a licking. Even as he sighed, she wavered towards him, her expression unmistakable. She had not had enough. With his old calm upon him once more, he put her from him, again, and again. He parried her blows with a natural jiu-jitsu, learnt by trying to stop her from marking him without hurting her. She was laughing again, laughing and coming on time after time, tirelessly, indomitably, towards his face, with the old rational look she hated, his face with the deep chin that counterbalanced the brute passion that had flashed in his eyes, his chin that divided him from her by thousands of years, proclaiming him her better. Polly made little helpless cries and occasionally told him she would have to go, though she did not move an inch. She had put on her factory shawl. "Whatever I do, you can't blame me," she said vaguely to the combatants once, but they did not hear her. Cherry was fighting Nan off every few seconds now. The moment came when his heaviness was beaten by her cat-like suddenness. A nail flayed his forehead, stroked its way down to his eye corner, made as though to plough through his eyeball. At that moment the devils woke in him. Yet though they woke, he gave them only so much leash. With a minimum of passion and the maximum of reason, he thrashed her. whilst the girl in the shawl circled round them now, saying babishly, "Ma'am, Dad," the dog under her shawl adding to the general din. She was crying easy, girlish tears, and rubbing them away with her shawl fringe. Then she sat down disconsolately in a chair, stroking Rag, and waited until it was over. A great quiet fell upon the house. The shrew was sobbing in her chair, subdued, ready to carry out his every wish now. But Cherry's face had all the demoralization of a man who has thrashed a lesser man than himself. He moved about the house, put on his coat, fed the dog, drank up his tea, picked up the dog again, as one who intends to leave nothing behind for revenge to work on, and with his nebbed cap on jauntily, to show the crowd outside that his manhood was intact, he strode up the passage. It was then that the shrew ran after him. Tear-blurred, penitent, her face asked him to forgive. He looked at her fixedly. Then he turned back into the kitchen, but it was for no reconciliation. 3 days was his usual time for becoming his genial self again after these frays. There was no mercury in his make-up. The shrew watched him approach the almanac, take out a pencil, wet it, and add another to the number of crosses. "Happen," he observed, "we's have peace for a bit." He went down the passage again, Polly taking the tea-can with her. Cherry still held the dog. Nan followed them again. "Bill," she said. On the doormat Cherry turned. "Wants to lick my boots because I thumped thee," he said disgustedly. Then, "No." A hearty force was in the negative. He pushed Polly gently out before him. The crowd edged away as he appeared unto them, but it cast a furtive, interested look at his face. It was not the face of a humiliated man. Polly hurried on. She was too young to stand the staring so well as Cherry. Her head was high, but her cheeks burnt. She walked a little unevenly. "Morning, Polly," said Cherry. "Morning, Dad," she replied. "Not after 10 o'clock, Polly," he said gently. She nodded obedience and went off sharply. But the dark look of dissatisfaction had returned. She was wondering, and quite reasonably, what there was to come home early for. Whilst Cherry was thinking that 10 o'clock of a Saturday night was quite late enough for any girl of 17, particularly for one who couldn't fight her way out of a sugar bag, he opened the door of the last house in the street. "Billy," he shouted. Billy came, took in the parcel of clothes, the pup, and assured some person within that everything was all right. "Best keep the door locked, though," warned Cherry. Whereupon an old man came out, a gentle-faced, docile creature, with white hair and a long pipe. "If she were mine, lad," he said in a voice like a drowning kitten's, "if she were mine." Billy and Cherry looked at Grandad Breeze contemplatively. The jaunty air shed itself from Cherry as he looked. The man of humour appeared again. Billy also was trying not to laugh. "Thou couldn't tame a louse," indignantly cried out Grandma Breeze, and followed her voice. Grandad Breeze looked darkly across the street, as much as to say what he'd have done with Nan Cherry. Cherry slapped him on the back. "There's only 2 things I haven't tried, Dad," he said. "Aye, what's them?" he was asked curiously. Cherry pulled Billy by the sleeve. "Hypnotism and chloroform," he said gravely. Then they heard the signal drop and set out at a mighty run, seeing Grandad Breeze dragged inside the house by Grandma Breeze, lest the vixen should come and besiege the house in an attempt to get Cherry's clothes. During the running, Cherry's face gradually became that of a man who had come down the stairs. His sense of moral loss cast no shadow over him. "Billy," he said as they ran along like 2 lads, "I've a lot to be thankful for. After all, a chap on our job doesn't need to be much at home." Billy nodded. "From now till neat, I work on the finest job on earth," he said reflectively, keeping pace with Billy. "Aye, thank God for trains." Billy nodded. He could understand that. "And for feet, Billy, feet," said the porter. He looked reflectively at his own as he ran. Then he said, "Where would I have been, Billy, but for feet?" There was a gratitude in his big voice. Then they saw Mr. Menzer. "You report yourselves for lateness, write it out, and hand it in to me tonight," he said. "My wife," said Cherry in a trembling voice, "has had a fit." "Oh, in that case," said the station master. Cherry winked at Billy. Billy grinned admiringly. "It isn't as if we get paid for that sort of overtime," said Cherry. "I'm not a blooming clerk, I'm a porter." Whistling a sea chanty, he passed into the porter's room with Billy. A few minutes later he was rushing along by the train, swinging himself on the footboard, transposed into the man who took the most tips on the narrow fields line. Grandma Bree, stepping out to sweep her flags with a great show of courage that covered a quaking heart, saw that the shrew also was sweeping out. Something white had evidently been spilt upon the flags. The mouth of the shrew was moving. Then the words stopped. Her lips thinned out. Grandma could see the flash of her eyes, and wondered for the 1000th time why such light were born. But seeing Nan look in her direction, she finished hastily. "She didn't say aught, did she?" asked Grandad Breeze, puffing at his pipe in the Yellowstone kitchen, where Billy's boots were the chief features. "If she said aught to me," said Grandma, like a Spartan. Then Grandad Breeze said, between the puffs, "I've sometimes thought how Billy were a bit sweet on Polly." Grandma drew herself up angrily at the idea. Part of her apron string showed itself as she did this, emerging from the crevices where it was usually buried deep, too deep to be seen. "Not at all that sort," she snapped. "She might take after her father," said old Breeze. "He's a decent lad." "If yonder lass lands herself where lassies should," she prophesied, "it'll be more luck nor management." "She's a nice lass," said Grandad Breeze. "Aye, a bit of rosy cheek and bright eye, and that's all chaps cares," said Grandma. "And after all, beauty only goes skin deep." Grandad looked at her slyly. "But ugliness goes to bone," he finished neatly. There was coldness between them for a full minute and a half. Then Grandad Breeze said, "Thou were jealous," and puffed his pipe in great enjoyment, which Grandma repudiated indignantly. She returned to the subject of the shrew. "Somebody spilt either flour or salt on yon flags of hers," she said, "and she's sweeping her way on it like it were poison." "If I had," said Grandad. "She'd have put 3 of thy sort into grave long sin," said Grandma. Grandad Breeze's love of posing as a wolf in sheep's clothing always amused and made her cross at the same time. "I wonder," she said after a long pause, "if it were flour or salt was spilt." In the full light of day in Christian England, Nan was performing a rite from the Dark Ages. She was sweeping her husband out with salt, sweeping him according to the black wish out of her life, whilst the Lord's Prayer, chanted backwards, made the spell efficient. Even so, as a wide-eyed child in Tanner Fold, those slums where Granny Harker had lived for some years, she remembered a drink-sodden Irish woman sweeping out a lazy husband who would not keep her in home comforts. Pat O'Brien had come home despite the spell, it is true, but Nan reiterated hers 3 times over to make quite sure. The moment of her turning to go within, broom in hand, synchronized with that whereon Cherry remarked to his pal, "Thank God for feet, Billy," which after all says nothing at all. Life is full of coincidences.